9 years ago, my own sister stole the man I was supposed to marry. For almost a decade, my family treated me like the pathetic woman left behind, while they paraded her perfect relationship around like a trophy. Years later, at an absurdly expensive family dinner, she slid an anniversary invitation across the table, smirked, and told me to go find a table for one. I just smiled. She had no idea the man she was trying to impress was about to lose everything, and the man walking through the restaurant doors to meet me was about to destroy her entire life. My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and this is the story of how a single dinner finally exposed the toxic lies my family built their lives upon. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever had to stand up to a family that constantly belittled your worth. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin cast a cold light over the white tablecloths. It was the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, and my family had insisted on this dinner to celebrate what they called a major milestone. I sat quietly sipping sparkling water, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety in my chest. Across from me sat Vanessa, my 35-year-old sister, wearing a smug expression that I had memorized since childhood. Beside her sat Dominic. He was a tall, strikingly handsome black man in a flashy, tailored suit, leaning back in his chair like he owned the building. 9 years ago, that man was my fiancé. Tonight, he was her husband. Vanessa reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick gold-embossed envelope. She tossed it casually across the table. It landed right in front of my plate, sliding until it hit my water glass. I stared at the elegant calligraphy spelling out their names for a 10-year anniversary celebration. She tilted her head, her smile sharp and predatory. "Still dining alone, Natalie?" she asked, her voice deliberately loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. She let out a soft theatrical sigh, adjusting a massive diamond ring on her finger. "I was going to ask the host to set an extra chair for you at our anniversary gala next month, but honestly, at your age, being the only single woman there is just embarrassing. Pity goes a long way. But maybe you should just go find a table for one tonight, too. You look entirely out of place here." Laughter erupted around the table. My father Thomas chuckled loudly, swirling his expensive scotch, as if my humiliation was the evening entertainment. My mother Diane patted Vanessa on the arm, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy as she looked at me. It was the exact same look she gave me 9 years ago when my entire world fell apart. I did not cry. I did not yell. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling the cool metal of my own ring hidden beneath the table. "You really did not need to waste expensive cardstock on me, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I am quite busy these days and will not be attending." Diane scoffed, shaking her head in sheer disgust. "Oh, please, Natalie. Busy doing what exactly? Still playing around with those little startup ideas of yours?" She leaned forward, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You know, if you had not been so obsessed with your little business ventures 9 years ago, maybe Dominic would not have felt so neglected. A man needs attention and respect. You practically forced him to seek comfort in Vanessa. She was actually there for him when you were staring at spreadsheets all night long." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My own mother was rewriting history to justify my sister stealing my fiancé. In their twisted version of reality, I was the cold, ambitious failure who drove away a good man, and Vanessa was the loving savior. They completely ignored the fact that my little business ventures had grown into a massive venture capital firm. They only saw what they wanted to see, the golden child who could do no wrong and the scapegoat who deserved nothing. Dominic adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking at me with feigned pity. "Listen to your mother, Natalie. I needed a real partner, not a roommate who was always working. Vanessa knows how to treat a man with respect. But hey, no hard feelings, right? I am actually doing great things now. Big things. I have moved way past the level you remember." He puffed out his chest, ready to brag. "Actually, I am stepping into the chief financial officer role at Apex Holdings next month," Dominic announced, signaling a waiter to bring over the wine menu. He leaned back, spreading his arms over the back of Vanessa's chair, completely soaking in the adoration of my parents. It is a grueling position, obviously. Managing billions in assets, restructuring corporate acquisitions, and dealing with the executive board. It requires a level of intellect and ruthless execution that most people simply do not possess. But when you have the natural talent for high-level finance, they fast-track you. They practically begged me to take the corner office. Vanessa stroked his arm, leaning her head on his shoulder. He works so hard, Natalie. You have no idea what it is like to be married to a man who is actively shaping the economy. My father nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with deep admiration. That is exactly what this family needed. A real businessman. Someone with vision and drive. Not like those people who just play around on their laptops in coffee shops and call themselves entrepreneurs. He shot a pointed glare in my direction, making sure his insult landed perfectly. Dominic laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls of our private dining alcove. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, flashing the inner silk lining. Well, Thomas, we all have to start somewhere. Some of us just start and never really move forward. He turned his gaze back to me, adopting a sickeningly sweet tone of false concern. Seriously though, Natalie, I see you sitting here looking exhausted, still hustling for pennies with that little consulting gig of yours. It must be exhausting living paycheck to paycheck at 33. I picked up my fork, gently tapping it against the edge of my porcelain plate. I am doing just fine, Dominic, I replied quietly. Vanessa rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly. Oh, stop being so defensive. Dominic is just trying to be generous, something you know absolutely nothing about. That is right, Dominic continued, resting his elbows heavily on the table. In fact, since I will be running the entire financial division at Apex, I am going to need a lot of administrative support. I could easily bypass the usual hiring protocols and slide your resume to the top of the pile. I need a new personal assistant, someone to handle my calendar, fetch my dry cleaning, organize my travel itineraries, and fetch coffee. It pays around $45,000 a year, maybe $50,000 if you learn how to answer the phones politely. It would be a massive step up from whatever it is you pretend to do all day. Plus, it would finally give you a real medical and dental plan. My mother gasped, clasping her hands over her chest as if Dominic had just offered to cure a rare disease. Oh my goodness, Natalie, you have to say yes. That is the most generous offer anyone has ever made you. After everything you put this family through with your stubbornness, he is still willing to look out for you. It shows real character on his part. You should be down on your knees thanking your brother-in-law for tossing you a lifeline. Maybe then you could finally afford to dress like you belong in a restaurant like this. I slowly looked around the table. 4 sets of eyes stared back at me, waiting for me to break. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to throw a tantrum, to storm out of the restaurant in a fit of jealous rage so they could spend the rest of the evening talking about how unhinged and bitter I still was. That was their favorite game. Push Natalie until she snaps, then play the victim. But I was not the same naive 24-year-old girl who cried on the floor of her childhood bedroom 9 years ago. I had spent the last decade building an empire of my own, quietly and ruthlessly. I knew exactly how the financial world operated, and more importantly, I knew everything about Apex Holdings. I did not break eye contact with Dominic. Instead, I calmly raised my left wrist and glanced at my Rolex. The smooth sweep of the second hand felt like a countdown ticking away the final moments of his miserable facade. An assistant position at Apex Holdings. I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. That is a very tempting offer, Dominic, truly. But I'm afraid I have to decline. Dominic let out a short, arrogant breath. Your pride is going to keep you poor, Natalie. Suit yourself. When they hand me the keys to the executive suite, do not come begging for a handout. I smiled, resting my hands on the table. The thing is, Dominic, I do not think they will be handing you those keys. In fact, I am quite certain the Chief Financial Officer position at Apex is no longer available to you or to anyone else in your department. Vanessa slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. Excuse me. What on earth are you talking about? Are you so jealous that you have resorted to making up delusions now? I kept my eyes locked directly on Dominic. His confident smirk faltered just a fraction of an inch. I am not making anything up, I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. You see, Dominic, it is currently 8:15 in the evening, and unless you have been completely ignoring your urgent emails all day while preparing for this little celebratory dinner, you would know that at exactly 10 o'clock this morning, the board of directors at Apex Holdings initiated a massive company-wide purge for internal corruption. The blood slowly drained from his face as my words pierced through his arrogant armor. Vanessa noticed his sudden silence and immediately stepped in to protect his ego. She slammed her hand flat against the table, glaring at me with absolute venom. Are you completely insane, Natalie? She hissed. You come here to our anniversary dinner dressed like you just walked out of a discount mall, and you have the nerve to invent some ridiculous corporate conspiracy just to make yourself feel better about your miserable life. Dominic is going to be a chief financial officer. He is untouchable. Dominic tried to recover, tugging at his crisp white collar. I do not know what fake news you are reading online, Natalie, but Apex is perfectly fine. My promotion is locked in. He reached for his crystal water glass, but his hand was visibly trembling, splashing a few drops onto the tablecloth. Vanessa sneered, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. Do not even bother engaging with her, Dominic. She is just acting out because she knows she will never achieve a fraction of what we have built together. While she is scraping the bottom of the barrel with her pathetic little consulting business, we are building a legacy. In fact, Natalie, since you love talking about high-level finance so much, let me share some actual financial news with you. News that involves real wealth, not just whatever pennies you manage to scrape together to pay your rent. My mother sat up straighter, a proud and deeply arrogant smile spreading across her face. Oh yes, Vanessa. Tell her. Maybe it will finally teach her how real families support one another when someone actually shows promise. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. My luxury fashion brand is rapidly expanding. We are opening 2 new flagship stores next quarter, one in Milan and one in Paris. It is a massive global expansion, something you could never even dream of achieving. But the best part is how we are funding it. Mom and Dad are my primary investors. They just injected a fresh $2 million in liquid capital straight into my company. My father puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with himself. That is right. When you see real talent, you back it. Vanessa has a vision. She has relentless drive. We are more than happy to provide the financial foundation she needs to completely take over the fashion industry. That is what parents do when they actually believe in their children. I looked at them, genuinely baffled by their sheer delusion. $2 million. I knew exactly what my parents' financial portfolio looked like. My father was a retired regional manager, and my mother had not worked a day since I was born. They lived comfortably in a nice suburb, but they absolutely did not have $2 million in liquid cash just sitting in a checking account waiting to be thrown at a failing vanity project. Where exactly did you get $2 million in liquid capital? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed through the private alcove. Oh, look at her. She is practically green with envy. If you must know, Mom and Dad leveraged the family assets. They took out a massive mortgage on the Hamptons estate. The bank appraised it, saw the incredible market value, and handed over the cash without a second thought. Because unlike you, Mom and Dad, understand that it takes serious money to make serious money. They are not afraid to take a calculated risk on a winner. They are securing their own financial future by investing in a guaranteed commercial success. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over my side of the table. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. I slowly lowered my hands, placing them flat against the pristine white tablecloth. My eyes darted from Vanessa to my mother, and finally settled on my father. He was practically glowing with pride, entirely oblivious to the absolute legal catastrophe he had just confessed to. "You mortgaged the Hamptons estate," I repeated. The words felt impossibly heavy on my tongue. "Yes, we did," my father replied sharply, clearly annoyed by my tone. "And we do not need your permission or your judgment. It is our property, and we will do whatever we please with it to support the daughter who actually brings honor to this family." I tilted my head, studying his face closely. I was waiting for the realization to hit him, but he just stared back with stubborn, reckless arrogance. My mother chimed in, adjusting her pearl necklace with a smug expression. "We went to the bank 6 months ago. The funds cleared almost immediately. Dominic handled all the complex paperwork for us, of course. He knows all the right people in the financial district. He secured us an incredible interest rate." I turned my gaze to Dominic. He was staring intensely at his empty porcelain plate, a thick layer of sweat forming on his forehead. He absolutely refused to look at me. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows. "The Hamptons estate," I said slowly, making sure every single syllable echoed clearly in the quiet dining room, "was purchased by Grandpa William 40 years ago. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "We know the history of the house, Natalie. We do not need a boring history lesson from someone who is too poor to even afford a decent apartment." I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes locked on my father. "Before Grandpa William passed away, he placed that estate into an irrevocable family trust to ensure it could never be sold or leveraged without unanimous consent." My father swallowed hard, his proud posture suddenly faltering as my words registered in his brain. "According to the rigid legal framework of that specific trust," I continued, my voice growing colder and sharper by the second, "any financial action regarding that property, especially taking out a $2 million commercial mortgage against its equity, requires the notarized signatures of both living beneficiaries." The table went deathly quiet. Only the faint clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables could be heard through the thin walls. "I am the second legal beneficiary of that trust," I stated, watching the color rapidly drain from my parents' faces, "and I never signed a single document." For several long, agonizing seconds, the only sound in our private dining alcove was the gentle hum of the air conditioning above us. The arrogant smirks completely vanished from my parents' faces, replaced by a sickly, chalky pallor. My father stared at me, his jaw slightly open, while my mother abruptly dropped her hands into her lap, as if the tablecloth had suddenly caught fire. The clinking of silverware from the main dining room felt miles away. "What do you mean you never signed?" my father managed to choke out. His voice suddenly lacked all of its previous booming authority, reducing him to a nervous stammer. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table, and locked my eyes directly onto his. "I mean exactly what I said, Dad. The trust mandates that both Vanessa and I must physically sign any paperwork that leverages the Hamptons estate. The bank would never, under any circumstances, release $2 million without that second notarized signature on the primary loan agreement. So I am going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. How did you get the money?" Vanessa looked back and forth between us, her confident posture momentarily wavering. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Vanessa demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "You said the bank approved the loan without any issues. You said the money was free and clear." Diane refused to look at Vanessa. She refused to look at me. She stared fixedly at her half-empty wineglass, her chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. "It was just a formality," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. "Just a stupid legal technicality that Grandpa William set up because he was overly cautious in his old age. He never meant for it to hold us back from helping family." "A technicality," I repeated, my tone razor sharp and devoid of any warmth. "Mom, the bank requires a verified signature. Did you find a corrupt notary willing to risk their state license, or did you just slide a piece of paper across a desk and hope the loan officer did not look too closely at the handwriting?" We did what we had to do. My father suddenly snapped. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal water glasses rattle, though this time his aggression was born entirely out of fear rather than dominance. Your sister was at a critical juncture. Her brand was expanding globally. She desperately needed the capital to secure international manufacturers and launch her new clothing line. We tried to call you Natalie. We left you voicemails, but you were always so unreachable, so wrapped up in your own selfish little world. We could not let her lose this massive opportunity just because you were too stubborn to answer your phone. So you forged my signature, I stated clearly, stripping away all of his weak emotional justifications. You committed felony mortgage fraud. You falsified federal legal documents to extract $2 million from an insured bank. Stop using those ugly words, my mother hissed, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She leaned across the table, her face contorted with anger. It is not fraud when it is family money. We are your parents. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owed us this. Besides, Vanessa needed the money, and you clearly did not. Look at you, Natalie. You are wearing a cheap blazer and dining alone at a restaurant you clearly cannot afford. What would you have even done with that money anyway? Hoarded it. We put it to good use to support someone who actually has a future. You stole my equity to fund a failing vanity project, I shot back, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. It is not failing. My father yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of red as the veins in his neck bulged. And we did not steal anything from you. It was a temporary loan. A bridge loan, essentially. Dominic handled the entire strategy. He pointed a trembling finger at Dominic, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floorboards and disappear forever. Dominic refused to make eye contact with any of us, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. Dominic reviewed Vanessa's entire business model. My father continued, his voice dripping with desperate, misplaced faith. He ran all the financial models. He told us that with a $2 million injection, her company's valuation would skyrocket overnight. He guaranteed us a 300% return on our investment within exactly 12 months. 300%, Natalie. We were going to pay the bank back in full before you ever even noticed the money was moved. Dominic finally found his voice, straightening his posture and adjusting his expensive silk tie. He looked at me with a condescending sneer, completely masking his previous panic with layers of aggressive corporate jargon. It is called a highly leveraged synergistic asset deployment, Natalie, Dominic said, rolling his hand as if he were explaining a simple concept to a toddler. You are clearly looking at this from a micro level. In high-tier institutional finance, we utilize temporary liquidity bridges to maximize aggressive growth potential. The return on investment for Vanessa's international expansion model vastly outpaces the negligible interest rate on that archaic property. It is strategic, macroeconomic structuring. I would not expect someone who runs a boutique consulting firm to understand the complexities of global market capitalization. Vanessa beamed, completely captivated by the string of meaningless buzzwords. Exactly, she chimed in, glaring at me. Dominic is a financial visionary. He knows exactly how to manipulate capital to generate massive wealth. You are just panicking over a simple administrative signature because you do not understand how real money works. My father nodded firmly, his confidence fully restored by Dominic's smooth talking. Dominic has an unparalleled track record, Natalie. He took a calculated risk to elevate this family, something you never had the courage to do. Once the profits start rolling in from the Paris flagship store, the bank loan will be a distant memory. We will double the equity of that old house. You should be taking notes instead of making wild accusations. I just stared at them. They were entirely spellbound by a man throwing around words like synergy and liquidity bridges to cover up a massive federal crime. It was a textbook gaslighting technique designed to make me question my own sanity and legal understanding. But before I could dismantle his ridiculous financial word salad, we were interrupted. The private dining room door opened, and the head sommelier stepped inside, accompanied by a senior waiter. The sommelier carried a silver tray with absolute reverence. Resting on the velvet lining was a dusty, dark glass bottle. Ah, perfect timing, Vanessa declared, clapping her hands together. She turned to me with a vicious, triumphant smile. Since you are clearly too stressed about money to enjoy yourself, Natalie, we decided to order something special to celebrate our 10-year milestone, something you will likely never taste in your lifetime. The sommelier gently presented the bottle to Dominic. The 1947 Cheval Blanc, sir, as requested. An exceptional choice to commemorate your anniversary. The current market valuation for this specific vintage is $15,000. My mother gasped in delight while my father let out a low whistle of appreciation. Vanessa practically vibrated with smug satisfaction. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to look at that bottle and realize the massive financial chasm between us. Dominic gave a short, arrogant nod. Open it. And make sure to bring a fresh glass for my sister-in-law. She looks like she could use a drink considering she just realized she has been outplayed in the business world. He reached into his custom-tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, matte, black metal credit card. He tossed it onto the sommelier's silver tray with a sharp, echoing clank. It was a deliberate theatrical display of ultimate wealth. Put the entire dinner on that along with the wine, Dominic instructed casually, not even looking at the waiter. And add a 20% gratuity. I am feeling generous tonight. The sommelier bowed respectfully. Right away, sir. I will process this and return to pour the wine. The two staff members exited the room. Dominic leaned back, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. You see, Natalie, this is the difference between us. You panic over a piece of paper. I buy a $15,000 bottle of wine on a Tuesday without checking my bank balance. When you operate at the executive level, money is just a tool. It is not something you fear. If you ever want to step up to the big leagues, I might be willing to teach you how to leverage assets. But you have to drop this paranoid attitude. You are embarrassing yourself. I did not say a word. I simply watched the second hand of my watch sweep smoothly across the dial. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. The tension in the room was palpable, disguised as celebratory anticipation by my family. But I knew exactly what was happening behind the polished wooden doors of the restaurant. Less than 2 minutes later, the door slowly opened again. It was not the sommelier returning to pour the wine. It was just the senior waiter, and he was not carrying the bottle of Cheval Blanc. He walked back to our table with stiff, uncomfortable steps. The confident smirk on Dominic's face froze. The waiter stopped directly next to Dominic's chair, holding the black metal credit card pinched awkwardly between his fingers. He leaned down slightly, trying to keep his voice discreet, but in the dead silence of the room, his words echoed like a gunshot. I am terribly sorry, sir. The waiter said, his expression strained, and his eyes darting nervously toward my parents. Your card has been declined. I ran it through our merchant system 3 times, but it is returning an error code. The terminal says your bank has placed a hard freeze on all of your accounts. Dominic snatched the heavy metal card out of the waiter's hand with a violent, jerky motion. That is impossible, he snapped, his voice cracking slightly on the last syllable. Run it again. Your machine must be malfunctioning. I have a limitless line of credit on that account. It is a premier corporate card. The waiter stood his ground, though he looked visibly uncomfortable under the harsh glare of the entire table. I assure you, sir, our systems are working perfectly. I even bypassed the main terminal and tried the backup system in the manager's office. The error message specifically indicated a comprehensive institutional freeze. We cannot process any transactions under your name or any associated accounts. Vanessa slammed her hands flat on the table, her face flushing bright red with sudden indignation. How dare you speak to my husband like that? She shrieked, completely abandoning the refined, wealthy persona she had been desperately trying to project all evening. Do you have any idea who he is? He is about to be the chief financial officer of Apex Holdings. You are probably just some college dropout who does not know how to operate a simple card reader. Go get your general manager right now. I want this entire meal comped for the sheer embarrassment you have caused us. The waiter offered a stiff, polite nod and quickly backed out of the room, clearly eager to escape Vanessa's escalating wrath. Dominic did not say a single word to defend the waiter or calm his wife. He was already pulling his sleek smartphone from his tailored jacket pocket, his fingers fumbling clumsily across the glowing screen. Sweat was beginning to bead along his hairline, catching the soft light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He pressed the phone hard against his ear, his leg bouncing aggressively under the table, vibrating the floorboards beneath us. "It is just a security trigger," Dominic announced to the table, forcing a strained, incredibly unnatural laugh that did not reach his eyes. "These high-tier banks are overly cautious to a fault. Whenever I make a large purchase, especially for something like vintage wine, at a luxury establishment, their fraud department panics and locks everything down. It happens all the time to high-net-worth individuals. It is the price of wealth, really. I just need to verify my identity with my private banker, and they will lift the freeze in 2 minutes." My father nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair, though the absolute blind certainty in his eyes had slightly dimmed for the very first time. "Of course, Dominic. Security is paramount when you are dealing with that level of capital. We understand completely. Take your time." My mother nervously smoothed the linen napkin on her lap, looking back and forth between Dominic and the door. "Do you need Thomas to cover the bill for now?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with a sudden underlying anxiety. "We can always settle up later. We have a backup credit card in the car." "Absolutely not." Vanessa snapped, glaring at our mother as if she had just offered a profound insult. "Dominic handles the finances. He has it completely under control. Do not patronize him in front of Natalie. That is exactly what she wants." Dominic stood up and paced the short length of the private alcove, barking aggressively into his phone. "Yes, this is Dominic. I need to speak to my private wealth manager immediately." "What do you mean he is unavailable?" "Listen to me, you entry-level idiot. I am trying to pay a massive corporate bill at Le Bernardin, and you have frozen my assets. Unfreeze them right now, or I will have your job by morning." I sat perfectly still, slowly sipping my sparkling water. I watched Dominic's reflection in the dark window pane overlooking the city street. His confident, arrogant facade was actively crumbling before my eyes. The invincible swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the desperate, frantic energy of a trapped animal, realizing the cage doors had just slammed shut. The voice on the other end of his call must have delivered absolutely devastating news, because his broad shoulders suddenly slumped, and his face turned the color of wet ash. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the blank screen in utter, paralyzing disbelief. He whispered something under his breath that sounded like a desperate plea. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" Vanessa asked, her voice finally losing its aggressive edge, replaced by a thin, undeniable veil of panic. Dominic opened his mouth to reply, but before he could spin another elaborate web of desperate financial lies, the heavy oak doors of our private dining room swung open. It was not the waiter returning with a manager. It was a man who commanded the atmosphere of any room he entered simply by existing in it. Harrison stepped into the alcove. He was 40 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of someone completely unaccustomed to hearing the word no. He wore a dark navy bespoke suit that had clearly been tailored in London, paired with a crisp white shirt and a subtle silk tie. His silver watch caught the ambient light, but it was his eyes that truly dominated the space. They were cold, piercing, calculating, and entirely uncompromising. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees the second he crossed the threshold. My parents stared at him in complete bewilderment, deeply intimidated by his sheer presence without even knowing who he was. Vanessa stopped breathing entirely, her eyes wide as she took in the immaculate tailoring and the quiet, dangerous authority radiating from him in waves. Dominic slowly turned around to face the door. When his eyes landed on Harrison, every single ounce of blood left his face. His jaw went completely slack. The expensive smartphone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the thick carpet with a dull thud. He did not even flinch at the sound. Dominic scrambled backward, his knee hitting the edge of the heavy wooden table, causing the crystal water glasses to chime loudly against each other. He stood up straight, his hands shaking uncontrollably at his sides, and instantly dropped his head into a submissive, deeply respectful bow. "Mr. Harrison," Dominic stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic, terrified whisper that barely carried across the quiet room. "Chairman of the board, what are you doing here?" Harrison did not even blink at the sound of Dominic's voice. He did not turn his head. He did not acknowledge the terrified man standing just inches away from him. To a man like Harrison, Dominic was not a threat, an employee, or even a person worthy of a casual greeting. He was entirely invisible. The absolute dismissal was more devastating than any physical blow could have been. Dominic remained frozen in his awkward, submissive bow, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. The heavy silence in the private dining room was broken only by the steady, rhythmic sound of Harrison's leather shoes moving across the thick carpet. He bypassed the head of the table where my father sat, ignored my mother's wide-eyed stare, and walked entirely past Vanessa, who was gripping the edge of her seat so hard her knuckles were completely white. He walked straight to my chair. The cold, impenetrable armor he wore when he entered the room instantly vanished. A genuine warm smile softened his sharp features. I looked up at him, feeling the familiar sense of calm that always accompanied his presence. "You are late," I said softly, though there was no real anger in my tone. Harrison chuckled, a rich, deep sound that sent a visible shiver down Dominic's spine. He placed a strong, reassuring hand on my shoulder and leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to my cheek. "I am incredibly sorry," darling Harrison said, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. "I fully intended to be here before the appetizers arrived. But cleaning house at the corporate level always takes far more time than one anticipates. We spent the entire afternoon firing a network of incompetent embezzlers from the lower management tiers of the finance department. You would be absolutely amazed at how bold some of these entry-level employees get when they think the executive board is not paying attention to the fractional accounting discrepancies." The word embezzlers hung in the air like a live grenade. Dominic let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, clutching his stomach as if he had just been physically punched. He staggered back another step, practically collapsing into the heavy wooden credenza against the wall. Vanessa was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Her brain was violently short-circuiting. She could not comprehend the visual data her eyes were sending her. The man standing next to me, affectionately rubbing my shoulder, was the very same billionaire chairman her husband constantly bragged about trying to impress. And yet this untouchable titan of industry was treating the sister she had just relentlessly mocked as if she were the most important person in the entire world. My mother, Diane, was the first to finally break the spell of absolute shock. She blinked rapidly, her gaze shifting frantically between my face and Harrison's custom-tailored suit. "Natalie," my mother started, her voice sounding thin and incredibly fragile. "Natalie, what is going on here? Who is this man and why is he kissing you? Do you know him from one of your little consulting jobs?" Harrison slowly straightened his posture. The warmth in his eyes completely vanished the second he looked away from me. He turned his attention to the rest of the table. The shift in his demeanor was terrifying. He became the apex predator once again, surveying a room full of people he had already defeated. He looked at my father, who was suddenly sweating profusely. He looked at Vanessa, who shrank back into her chair under his piercing gaze. Finally, he allowed his eyes to briefly land on Dominic, who was trembling so violently that the ice water in a nearby pitcher was vibrating. "I suppose formal introductions are long overdue, considering the circumstances," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register that commanded absolute authority. "Dominic here seems to know my corporate title, though. His understanding of his own position within my company is highly questionable. But we are not here to discuss my corporate portfolio. We are here for a family dinner." Harrison reached out and gently took my hand, intertwining his fingers firmly with mine. He lifted our joined hands slightly, making sure the light from the crystal chandeliers caught the matching platinum bands on our ring fingers. "My name is Harrison," he announced, his voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls with absolute finality. "I am not here tonight as the chairman of Apex Holdings. I am here as Natalie's husband. We have been happily married for the past 2 years. And I must say, after everything I have heard tonight, it is truly fascinating to finally meet the people who so foolishly underestimated my wife." The sheer gravity of Harrison's words hit the table like a physical shockwave. My mother's jaw remained permanently unhinged, her eyes darting frantically between my simple outfit and Harrison's undeniable aura of immense wealth. The man they had spent the entire evening worshipping, the legendary titan of industry that Dominic had used to validate his own miserable existence, was my husband. I watched Vanessa's face cycle through confusion, denial, and finally a deep, agonizing jealousy. The reality was breaking her mind. For 9 years she believed she had stolen the ultimate prize. She believed she had relegated me to a life of pathetic mediocrity. Now, sitting in her rented designer dress, she realized her entire life was a cheap imitation compared to the empire I had quietly built. But the most pathetic display came from Dominic. After the initial wave of paralyzing terror passed, his survival instincts kicked in. And Dominic only knew one way to survive: deception. He forced out a loud, incredibly unnatural laugh that sounded more like a choking gasp. He awkwardly pushed himself off the wooden credenza, desperately trying to straighten his posture and smooth out the wrinkles in his tailored suit. "Well, I have to say this is quite the plot twist," Dominic exclaimed, clapping his hands together with a hollow smack. He took a tentative step toward Harrison, wearing a sickeningly eager smile that practically radiated desperation. "You really kept this quiet at the office, Mr. Harrison. I had no idea my sister-in-law was married to the big boss. If I had known, I would have invited you to our anniversary dinner directly. We could have talked about the upcoming quarter over some scotch. You know how it is in the executive suite. It is a small world after all, right?" He actually had the audacity to extend his right hand toward Harrison, offering a firm buddy-to-buddy handshake. Dominic was actively trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. He was trying to show my parents that he was still important, still a high-level player who could casually rub elbows with the chairman of the board and laugh off the tension. He was clinging to the illusion of his own grandeur with bleeding fingernails. Harrison looked down at Dominic's outstretched hand, as if it were a piece of rotting garbage on the sidewalk. He did not move a single muscle to reciprocate. The agonizing silence stretched on for 5 brutal seconds until Dominic finally pulled his hand back, swallowing hard, the sweat now visibly dripping down his temples and staining his crisp white collar. My father, still desperately clinging to the illusion of Dominic's success, cleared his throat nervously. "Well, Mr. Harrison, since you are family now, I suppose congratulations are in order. Dominic here is about to be your new Chief Financial Officer. I am sure you two will be working very closely together to maximize Apex Holdings' profits. It is good to keep these high-level positions within the family." Harrison slowly turned his gaze to my father, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Thomas, was it?" Harrison asked, his tone laced with razor-sharp precision that immediately silenced my father. "Let me make something incredibly clear to you and to everyone else sitting at this table. I do not work closely with Dominic. In fact, until 10 o'clock this morning, I had absolutely no idea who this man was. He is not in my executive suite. He is not my peer. And he is certainly not the next chief financial officer of my company." Vanessa gasped, grabbing the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. "What are you saying? Dominic told us he was fast-tracked for the corner office. He manages billions in corporate assets. He manages nothing." Harrison interrupted, his voice echoing with brutal authority that left absolutely no room for argument. "The only thing Dominic has managed to do during his time at my company is sit in a cubicle on the 3rd floor and process basic data entry for the regional logistics team. He is a mid-level clerk. Nothing more. Dominic's face turned completely gray. He opened his mouth to protest, to spin another elaborate lie, but the words died instantly in his throat under Harrison's unwavering stare. As for the current freeze on his bank accounts, Harrison continued taking a step closer to the trembling man that was not an administrative error or a security trigger. I personally authorized that freeze across all banking institutions, because as of 10 o'clock this morning, Dominic and I do have a new relationship, but it is not a professional one. We are not colleagues, we are not friends. As of this morning, I am the lead plaintiff actively suing him in federal court. Before anyone could even process the word court, Harrison reached inside the breast pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out a simple piece of paper. He produced a thick, tightly bound legal dossier, stamped with the red seal of the federal court district. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the heavy stack of documents directly onto the center of the table. The dossier landed with a loud, aggressive thud, slamming right on top of my parents' pristine white dinner plates. A crystal water glass tipped over, spilling ice and water across the expensive linen tablecloth, but nobody even dared to reach for a napkin. Everyone was completely paralyzed, staring at the thick stack of papers as if it were a live explosive. Vanessa was shaking her head violently, her perfectly styled blonde hair falling into her face. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the sudden revelation. "No, that is a mistake. You have the wrong person entirely. Dominic is an executive. He is the vice president of regional acquisitions. He told us he was being promoted to chief financial officer this week. He has his own corner office on the top floor." Harrison did not even look at her. He kept his piercing gaze locked entirely on Dominic, who was now sweating so profusely that his silk shirt was sticking to his chest. "A corner office," Harrison repeated, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "Dominic, why do you not explain to your lovely wife what your actual workspace looks like? Or would you prefer I read it directly from your official employment file for everyone to hear?" Dominic opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak came out. He looked desperately at the door, then back at the dossier, completely trapped by the undeniable truth. "Since you seem to have lost your voice, I will clarify things for your family," Harrison said, taking a slow step forward. "Dominic is not a vice president. He is not a chief financial officer. He does not sit on the executive board, and he has absolutely zero authority over any acquisitions, regional or otherwise. In fact, Dominic does not even work in the main corporate tower." My father leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. "What do you mean he does not work in the tower? He takes business trips to the headquarters all the time. He meets with the board to discuss strategy. He meets with the IT department when he forgets his computer password." Harrison corrected sharply, not missing a single beat. "Dominic is a mid-level data manager for our secondary logistics warehouse in New Jersey. His primary responsibility is ensuring that basic shipping invoices match the regional delivery schedules. He sits in a windowless cubicle on a floor with 200 other mid-level clerks. He does not negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts. He inputs tracking numbers into a spreadsheet. The absolute humiliation in the room was suffocating. Vanessa let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with both hands. Her entire identity, the wealthy, untouchable wife of a high-powered corporate executive, was being ripped away from her sentence by sentence. "But his salary," my mother stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Dominic. "His designer clothes, the cars. He makes over $700,000 a year." Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. "His base salary is exactly $82,000 a year before taxes. If he is wearing designer clothes and driving luxury cars, he is either renting them, swimming in crippling credit card debt, or paying for them with money that does not belong to him. Knowing what I know now, I would confidently bet on the latter." My father stood up slowly, his face flushed with a terrifying mix of rage and utter confusion. He looked at Dominic, who was actively shrinking against the wall, refusing to make eye contact with the man who had praised his financial genius just 20 minutes ago. Dominic. My father growled, his voice trembling with fury. Tell me he is lying. Tell me right now that you are the executive you promised us you were. Dominic just squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head, looking like a pathetic child caught in a massive lie. Vanessa screamed, slamming her fists onto the table. Why would you lie about this? Why would you pretend to be an executive? Because he is a parasite, Harrison stated coldly, cutting through her hysterical screaming. He created a fake persona to impress a family of shallow, gullible people who only value status. But inflating his resume and lying to his in-laws is not a federal crime. I do not care what fairy tales he tells at the dinner table. That is not why my legal team spent the last 48 hours tearing apart his entire digital footprint. Harrison reached out and tapped the thick dossier sitting in the spilled water. I did not file a federal lawsuit and authorize a complete freeze on all of your banking assets just because you are a pathetic liar, Dominic Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. I sued you because of what you did with your basic system access. The audit we ran this morning revealed a massive discrepancy in the logistics accounts. I am suing you for the missing funds. Harrison slowly flipped open the heavy cover of the dossier. The crisp sound of the thick paper turning was the only noise in the entire restaurant alcove. He did not look at Dominic anymore. He turned his attention directly to my parents. When my security team flagged the missing logistics funds this morning, they initiated a comprehensive forensic audit on every single account. Tied to Dominic Harrison explained, his voice perfectly level. What they found was a pathetic attempt at money laundering. Dominic was using our corporate vendor payment system to wash external funds. A very specific sum of external funds. $2 million to be exact. My father flinched as if he had been slapped across the face. 2 million, my father whispered, the color draining from his cheeks once again. But that is the money from the Hamptons house. That is the capital for Vanessa and her new fashion brand. Harrison shook his head slowly. Vanessa's fashion brand never saw a single penny of that money, Thomas. The day the bank cleared your fraudulent mortgage and transferred the funds to Dominic, he routed the entire amount through 3 different shell companies. Harrison traced his finger down a printed spreadsheet in the dossier. According to the federal wire transfer logs, $1.2 million went to an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. The remaining $800,000 was wired directly to a private entertainment group based in Macau. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her fingernails digging into the white linen. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. Dominic does not know anything about holding accounts in Macau. He was securing international manufacturers for my clothing line. He told me the negotiations were delicate. He was not negotiating with clothing manufacturers, Vanessa Harrison replied coldly. He was paying off massive underground gambling debts. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Gambling. My mother repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Dominic, who had covered his face with both hands, quietly sobbing against the wall. Dominic, tell him he is wrong. Tell him you did not gamble away our house. Dominic could not speak. He just kept his face buried in his hands, shaking his head back and forth in a pathetic display of cowardice. Harrison picked up a stack of glossy photographs from the back of the dossier and tossed them onto the table. They spread out across the white cloth, perfectly clear under the chandelier light. My investigators work incredibly fast, Harrison stated. These are security stills from 3 different underground casinos in Brooklyn and an illegal high-stakes poker room in Atlantic City. You will notice the timestamps. While you thought your husband was working late at the corporate tower to secure your financial future, he was actually sitting at a baccarat table, bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars to people who do not hesitate to break legs when they are owed money. I watched Vanessa stare at the photographs. There was Dominic wearing his expensive rented suit surrounded by stacks of casino chips and unsavory characters. The reality of her entire marriage was unraveling right in front of her eyes. She had spent the last 9 years believing she had won the lottery, but she had actually chained herself to a degenerate gambler who was using her family as an endless automated teller machine. My father stared blindly at the financial documents scattered around his dinner plate. His chest heaved as the catastrophic reality of the situation finally settled into his mind. He slowly lifted his head and looked at my mother. The absolute horror in their eyes was unmistakable. I could see the exact moment their entire world collapsed. They had not just lost their retirement. They had not just lost the beloved family estate. They had actively committed a major federal felony. They had forged my signature, defrauded a national bank, and risked spending the rest of their natural lives in a federal penitentiary. And they had done all of it for a man who took their money and handed it straight to illegal bookies. My father grabbed the edge of the table, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged. He realized the terrifying truth. They had committed a severe crime for a lying thief, and now there was absolutely no money left to pay the bank back. They were completely ruined. They had sacrificed their own daughter and their freedom to fund a gambling addiction. The silence that followed this realization was deafening, but it only lasted for a fraction of a second. The complete psychological collapse of my father instantly transformed into explosive, unhinged violence. Thomas let out a primal guttural roar that tore through the refined atmosphere of the restaurant. He lunged across the wide mahogany table with a terrifying burst of speed. His hands bypassed the scattered legal documents and the spilled water, aiming directly for Dominic. My father grabbed Dominic by the lapels of his rented designer suit and violently yanked him forward. Crystal water glasses shattered against the floor. Silverware clattered loudly as the heavy table shifted from the sheer force of the impact. Dominic let out a high-pitched shriek of pure terror, completely unable to defend himself as my father hauled him over the white linen tablecloth. "You worthless parasite!" My father screamed, his face inches from Dominic, his breath hitching with uncontrollable rage. "I gave you everything. I risked my freedom for you. Where is my money? Tell me where my money is right now, or I swear I will end you." Dominic thrashed wildly, his expensive silk tie tightening dangerously around his neck as my father twisted the fabric. "I do not have it." Dominic choked out, tears streaming down his panicked face. "It is gone. I lost it on a bad hand. I tried to win it back. I swear I tried to win it back for you." My mother snapped out of her paralyzed state. She leaped from her chair, her pearl necklace swaying violently as she leaned over the table. She did not try to stop my father. Instead, she joined the assault, her voice cracking into a hysterical, piercing scream. "You stole our retirement!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger directly at Dominic. "We mortgaged the Hamptons house for you. We forged a federal document for you. We trusted you to build an empire for our daughter, and you threw our entire lives onto a casino table. You are a monster." The private dining room had descended into absolute chaos. Waiters hovered nervously outside the glass-paneled doors, unsure whether to intervene or call the police. Harrison stood perfectly still beside me, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored trousers, watching the destruction with cold, detached satisfaction. He did not need to lift a single finger. The family that had tormented me for 9 years was actively tearing itself apart. But Vanessa was not ready to surrender her illusion. The reality of her husband being a degenerate thieving fraud was too agonizing for her fragile ego to process. So she resorted to the only defense mechanism she knew: absolute, blinding denial. "Stop it!" Vanessa screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing painfully off the walls. She rushed around the table and shoved my father backward with surprising force, breaking his grip on Dominic. She stood protectively in front of her husband, her chest heaving, her eyes wild and completely unhinged. "Leave him alone," Vanessa ordered, her face flushed with manic desperation. "Do you not see what is happening here? Do you not see what she is doing?" She pointed a frantic, shaking finger directly at me. "This is all a lie," Vanessa continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Natalie fabricated all of this. She and her rich husband hired someone to forge these bank records and print out those fake casino photos. They are trying to frame Dominic. My father stared at her in utter disbelief, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Vanessa. The money is gone, he gasped. He just admitted he lost it. He was intimidated. Vanessa yelled back, her logic completely abandoning her. They cornered him. Natalie has been planning this for 9 years. She is still obsessed with Dominic. She has been boiling with jealousy ever since the day he realized I was the better woman and left her pathetic life behind. She could never handle the fact that I won. And now she is using her billionaire husband to destroy my marriage and ruin my successful fashion brand out of pure, bitter spite. I listened to her unhinged rant without shifting my posture. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was almost impressive. She was standing in the wreckage of her entire life defending the man who had bankrupted her parents, and still she somehow managed to make herself the victim of my imaginary jealousy. Harrison glanced down at me, a subtle, dark amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. He took a single step back, silently signaling that it was my turn to finish the execution. I slowly walked toward the table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stopped just a few feet away from Vanessa, looking at her flushed, tear-stained face with absolute zero sympathy. "You think I am jealous of you?" I asked, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal calm that instantly cut through the chaotic noise of the room. "You think I am jealous of your fashion brand, Vanessa?" Vanessa blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift in my focus. Her chest was still heaving from screaming at our father, but she quickly masked her panic with her signature sneer. "Of course you are," Vanessa spat out, crossing her arms defensively. "You have always been jealous of my success. While you sit behind a desk pushing papers, I am a creative visionary. My brand is expanding globally. I have thousands of followers who worship my lifestyle. I am an actual CEO." I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or try to match her hysterical energy. Instead, I calmly reached into my leather tote bag, resting on a nearby chair, and pulled out my iPad. I tapped the screen a few times, bringing up a highly specific public file I had bookmarked earlier that afternoon. "A creative visionary," I repeated flatly, walking back to the table. I placed the iPad down right next to the shattered crystal and the scattered casino photographs. "Let us talk about your visionary business model then." My parents, momentarily distracted from their homicidal rage toward Dominic, looked at the glowing screen. Vanessa stared at it suspiciously, refusing to lean closer. "What is that?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with apprehension. "Another fake document your husband printed out to ruin my night." "This is not from Harrison," I replied smoothly. "This is a matter of public record. Anyone with a basic internet connection and an ounce of curiosity can find it. But since you are the CEO, I think it is only fair that you read it to the table. Go ahead, Vanessa. Read the highlighted text." I pushed the iPad an inch closer to her. Vanessa glared at me, her jaw clenched tight. She reluctantly lowered her eyes to the screen. I watched her pupils dart back and forth as she scanned the first few lines. The arrogant, defensive posture instantly melted away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated dread. Her breathing hitched, and she took a sudden step back as if the iPad had physically burned her. "Read it aloud." "Vanessa?" I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Read it to Mom and Dad. Tell them exactly how successful your fashion brand really is." "I will not play your twisted little games," Vanessa whispered, shaking her head frantically. She tried to look away, but my father, whose entire financial future was currently burning to the ground, reached over and grabbed the tablet. "If she will not read it, I will," Thomas growled. He squinted at the bright screen, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. His face, already pale from the revelation of Dominic's gambling debts, somehow turned an even more sickly shade of gray. "What does it say, Thomas?" my mother asked, her voice trembling violently. "What else is there? What else did they do?" My father slowly lowered the iPad, looking at his golden child with an expression of complete and utter betrayal. "It is a court filing," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. United States Bankruptcy Court, Southern District of New York, filed exactly 3 months ago. He looked up, locking eyes with Vanessa. She shrank under his gaze, covering her mouth with her trembling hands. It says here that your fashion brand filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. Thomas continued reading the words as if they were a death sentence. It says you have defaulted on 4 different commercial loans, failed to pay your fabric suppliers for the last 8 months, and have 0 remaining liquid assets. You are millions of dollars in the red. Diane gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a physical heart attack. Bankruptcy, she shrieked. But you told us you were opening flagship stores in Paris and Milan. You said you just needed the Hamptons' money to secure international manufacturers. There was no international expansion, Mom. I interrupted, looking at Vanessa's tear-streaked face with absolute disgust. Her brand has been dead for over a year. She has been completely bankrupt for 3 months. She has been secretly drowning in a massive ocean of corporate debt, dodging creditors, and facing multiple lawsuits from unpaid vendors. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The truth was finally out in the open, raw and undeniable. While she was parading around on Instagram, posting photos of luxury dinners and pretending to be a successful, thriving CEO, she was actually flat broke. I continued, making sure every single word landed like a physical blow. Her entire online presence is a carefully curated illusion. She is a complete failure. She knew she was going under. She knew her business was worthless. And yet she still sat back and watched you forge my signature and mortgage your only valuable asset, knowing full well she could never pay you back. You lied to us, Diane whispered, her voice cracking as she stared at her favorite daughter. You let us risk federal prison for a company that was legally dead. I did not know it was that bad. Vanessa sobbed, her voice muffled behind her hands. I had to keep up appearances. My followers expect a certain lifestyle from me. If I admitted I was struggling, the brand would lose all its value instantly. Your followers, my father shouted, slamming his fist against the table. You bankrupt your own family for your followers? Look at your golden child now, I said softly to my parents. Her entire life is a lie, built on stolen money and fake photos. And you handed her everything on a silver platter because you wanted to believe the illusion just as badly as she did. Vanessa shook her head wildly, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edges of her chair as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. She tried to muster the arrogant sneer that had defined her entire existence, but her facial muscles simply refused to cooperate. I am not broke, Vanessa protested, her voice a desperate, raspy whisper. Look at me, Natalie. Look at the life I live. You cannot fake this level of luxury. I looked at her. I really looked at her, scanning her from head to toe with cold, clinical precision. You are right, Vanessa, I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension in the room. Let us look at you. Let us look at the undeniable proof of your immense wealth. I stepped closer, gesturing toward the stunning emerald green silk gown she was wearing. It was a flawless designer piece that had undoubtedly turned heads when she walked into the restaurant. Mom told me you bought that dress exclusively for tonight, I said. She bragged that it cost $6,000 straight off the runway in Milan. Vanessa lifted her chin defensively, though her eyes were completely terrified. It did, she snapped, clinging to the lie with her fingernails. I smiled, shaking my head slowly. No, it did not. That dress belongs to a luxury rental subscription service called Couture Closet, based out of Brooklyn. If you look closely at the inside hem near her left ankle, Mom, you will see the tiny scanning barcode they stitch into all of their rental garments. Vanessa pays $250 a month to borrow clothes she could never actually afford. And if she does not return that dress in the prepaid mailer by Monday morning, they are going to charge her credit card a late fee that will likely bounce. My mother gasped, leaning sideways in her chair to stare at the hem of Vanessa's dress. Vanessa instinctively crossed her legs, trying to hide the fabric, but the frantic movement only confirmed the absolute truth. But that is not all. I continued, not giving her a single second to recover. What about that breathtaking anniversary gift? The necklace Dominic surprised you with before we sat down. Vanessa's hand shot up to her throat, her fingers clutching the massive glittering stone resting against her collarbone. Dominic spent hours picking this out, she cried out, her voice cracking. It is a flawless 2-carat diamond. He told everyone at the table it was certified. Dominic could not afford a certified diamond if he sold his own kidneys, I replied bluntly. That necklace is high-grade cubic zirconia set in plated sterling silver. You can buy the exact same piece on a discount jewelry website for exactly $149. It is completely worthless, Vanessa. Just like the fake promotions he bragged about. Just like the fake business empire you pretend to run. My father covered his face with his hands, letting out a long, agonizing groan. He was watching the absolute destruction of the daughter he had placed on a pedestal his entire life. Everything he had believed about her, every reason he had used to justify treating me like a complete disappointment, was being systematically dismantled right in front of his eyes. And then there is the car, I said, turning my attention to the large bay window overlooking the street. The bright red Italian sports car parked at the valet stand out front, the one you made sure we all saw you step out of when you arrived. Do not talk about my car, Vanessa sobbed, her tears finally ruining her pristine makeup, leaving dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. It is not your car, I corrected her sharply. It is a corporate lease under your bankrupt fashion brand, a lease that you are currently 3 months behind on. In fact, the only reason you drove it here tonight is because you are hiding it from the repossession company that has been circling your apartment complex for the last 2 weeks. If the valet leaves it parked on the street for too long, a tow truck is going to hook it up and drag it away before dessert is even served. The sheer weight of the absolute truth finally crushed whatever remained of Vanessa's delusional spirit. She could no longer fight back. She could no longer spin the narrative. Her entire reality, meticulously constructed from rented dresses, fake diamonds, unpaid leases, and stolen family money, had been completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Vanessa collapsed forward, burying her face in her arms against the table, sobbing with a deep, guttural agony that echoed off the mahogany walls. The sound of her crying was not the delicate, manipulative weeping she usually employed to get her way. It was the raw, ugly sound of a woman realizing her entire life was an empty, pathetic joke. She had nothing left. No money, no successful brand, no wealthy husband, and now no pride. My mother reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch Vanessa's shoulder, but she pulled back at the last second. The golden child was entirely broken. Diane looked at the cubic zirconia necklace catching the light of the chandelier, and then she looked at the barcode peeking out from the hem of the rented silk gown. The absolute shame radiating from my parents was suffocating. They had traded their financial freedom and risked federal prison to fund a lifestyle that did not even exist. They had destroyed my trust and their own future for a woman who was nothing more than a walking billboard of unpaid debts and cheap imitations. I stood over my sister, watching her body heave with every pathetic sob, feeling absolutely no pity. The heavy silence in the room was now only broken by the sound of Vanessa weeping into her rented silk sleeves. My mother, Diane, remained completely frozen in her chair. I watched the gears turning in her head as the full, terrifying gravity of the situation finally crashed down on her shoulders. She looked at her husband Thomas, who was staring blankly at the wall, completely broken. She looked at the fake diamond necklace around Vanessa's neck, and then slowly she looked at the forged bank documents scattered across the table. The reality was stark and unforgiving. There was no money. There was no successful fashion empire to bail them out. There was only a massive, fraudulent commercial loan hanging over their heads, a federal crime they had willingly committed to fund a mirage. If the bank discovered the forgery, and they absolutely would once the payments stopped, my parents were not just going to lose the Hamptons estate. They were going to lose their freedom. They were looking at years in a federal penitentiary. I saw the exact moment the panic truly set in. Diane's breathing became erratic. Her hands began to shake so violently that her pearl bracelet rattled against the edge of the wooden table. She darted her eyes toward the door as if expecting the authorities to walk in right that second. Then her desperate gaze shifted toward Harrison. He stood tall and unbothered, adjusting his custom silk tie, the living embodiment of limitless wealth and absolute power. Suddenly, a new sickening realization washed over my mother's face. The only person in the entire world who could instantly make this nightmare disappear was standing right in front of her. The billionaire husband of the daughter she had just spent the entire evening humiliating. Diane abruptly pushed her chair back, the wooden legs screeching loudly against the floor. She completely ignored Vanessa stepping right past her golden child, who was still hyperventilating over her ruined fake life. Diane practically ran around the massive dining table, her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor. Before I could even take a step back, my mother threw herself at me. She grabbed both of my arms with a grip so tight, her fingernails dug painfully through the fabric of my blazer. Her face was inches from mine, stripped of all its usual condescension and aristocratic pride. It was replaced by a wild, terrifying desperation. "Natalie, please." Diane gasped, her eyes wide and pleading. "Natalie, you have to listen to me. We made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. We trusted the wrong person. We were blinded by Dominic and his lies. You have to understand that we only wanted what was best for the family. We just wanted to see your sister succeed. We did not know he was stealing from us." She shook my arm slightly, trying to force me to mirror her frantic energy. "But you can fix this, Natalie. You have the power to fix all of this right now." She shot a desperate glance over my shoulder at Harrison. "Your husband, he has billions. A $2 million mortgage is absolutely nothing to him. It is pocket change. It is a rounding error in his bank account." I stared at her, completely revolted by the sheer audacity of her demands. She was not apologizing for abusing me. She was not apologizing for treating me like garbage for 9 years. She was only apologizing because she got caught, and now she wanted to use me as a human shield against the consequences of her own illegal actions. "Please, Natalie." Diane begged, her voice cracking as fresh tears spilled down her heavily powdered cheeks. "You have to save us. You cannot let your father and me go to prison over a piece of paper. We will lose everything. The Hamptons house, our retirement, our entire lives. You have to tell Harrison to pay off the loan. Just have him wire the money to the bank tomorrow morning and clear the debt. We will owe you forever. We will do whatever you want. Just please, you are my daughter. You have to protect your family." The words hung in the air, dripping with toxic entitlement and emotional manipulation. For 33 years, I had craved her validation. I had spent my entire childhood twisting myself into knots trying to earn a single scrap of the affection she freely poured over Vanessa. And now here she was, practically begging on her knees, using the title of mother as a weapon to extort my husband's money. I looked down at her hands gripping my arms. Her knuckles were white from the strain. I did not yell. I did not pull away violently. Instead, I reached up with complete icy composure. I placed my hands over hers, feeling the frantic pulse in her wrists. And then, with slow, deliberate precision, I peeled her fingers off my arms one by one. I let her hands drop into the empty space between us. My mother stumbled back a half step, looking at her empty palms as if she could not comprehend what had just happened. For my entire life, her physical touch had been a command. Her demands were the absolute law of the household. But right now, standing in the middle of the most exclusive restaurant in the city, she was just a terrified, hollow woman realizing she had absolutely no power over me anymore. It felt like shedding a physical weight I had carried for over 3 decades. The restaurant alcove remained deathly quiet. Even the waitstaff hovering outside the glass doors had stopped moving, captivated by the absolute destruction of our family dynamic. Harrison stood silently by my side, a steady and immovable presence, giving me the floor to execute the final judgment. I looked at my mother. I looked at the dark streaks of expensive mascara running down her face. I searched my heart for even a fraction of sympathy, for some lingering desire to be the good and obedient daughter she always demanded I be. I found absolutely nothing. The well of my empathy had completely dried up. "You want me to save you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet it echoed with the heavy force of a gavel striking wood. "You want me to tell my husband to open his checkbook and magically erase the catastrophic consequences of your own greed. You stand there crying about how you only wanted what was best for the family, but we both know that is a pathetic lie. You never cared about this family as a whole. You only ever cared about Vanessa. You only cared about the perfect image she projected to your wealthy friends at the country club." I took a slow step forward, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "I want you to think back to a very specific night." I continued, my tone completely flat, devoid of any screaming or hysteria. 9 years ago. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was 24 years old, sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom. My entire world had just violently collapsed. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, had just left me for my own sister. I was entirely broken. I was sobbing so hard I could barely pull air into my lungs, and I begged you for comfort. I begged my own mother to hold me, to tell me that my sister was wrong, to tell me that I did not deserve to be betrayed. My mother swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically toward the floor, completely unable to hold my gaze as the agonizing memory resurfaced. "Look at me," I commanded, my voice turning into pure ice. "Do you remember what you did that night? You did not hug me. You did not offer a single word of maternal comfort. You stood in the doorway of my bedroom wearing your favorite silk robe, looking down at my shattered heart with absolute unvarnished disgust. You rolled your eyes at my pain, and then you delivered a lesson I have carried with me every single day since." I paused, letting the heavy silence amplify the crushing weight of my next words. "You looked at your heartbroken daughter crying on the floor, and you said, 'Weak people must accept the rules of the strong. Stop complaining and deal with it.'" My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to cover her mouth. The last remaining drops of color completely drained from her face. She remembered. She remembered every single cruel, calculated syllable she had weaponized against me to protect her golden child. "You told me that my grief was pathetic." I continued, mercilessly twisting the knife. "You told me Vanessa was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more deserving of happiness, and that I simply had to accept my place at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. You established the rules of the game that night. You taught me that loyalty does not exist, that blood means absolutely nothing, and that ruthless power is the only currency this family respects. Well, look around you now." I gestured toward the scattered bankruptcy files, the fake diamond necklace, and the weeping fraud of a sister sitting at the table. "Look at the strong people you chose to protect. Look at the rules they played by. I learned your lesson perfectly. I spent the last 9 years building my own strength, forging my own empire, so I would never have to rely on toxic people like you ever again." Diane fell heavily to her knees, her designer dress pooling around her on the thick carpet. She reached out with trembling hands to grab the hem of my blazer, sobbing with pure, unfiltered hysteria. "Please, Natalie, I am begging you. We will go to federal prison. Please, just give us the money." I took a deliberate step back, pulling my fabric out of her desperate reach. "I am not going to give you a single cent," I said, looking down at her with absolute finality. "You made your choices. You forged the legal documents. You chose the golden child. Now you are the weak ones. Stop complaining and deal with it." Diane remained on the floor, the absolute picture of complete and utter defeat. But my father, Thomas, could not accept this reality. His entire life was built on pride, control, and absolute authority over me. Seeing his wife humiliated and realizing that I was actively refusing to hand over the money, snapped whatever fragile restraint he had left. He stomped forward, his face flushed an ugly, mottled red. His fists clenched tightly at his sides as the veins in his neck visibly throbbed. "You ungrateful little brat!" Thomas snarled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying rage. You think you can just walk away from us? You think you can marry into billion-dollar money and watch your own flesh and blood burn to the ground? I am your father. I gave you everything. I raised you. I paid for your food, your clothes, and the roof over your head for 18 years. If you do not wire that money to the bank by tomorrow morning, I will drag you into court. I will sue you for everything you are worth. I will legally force you to release your half of the trust so we can restructure the loan. You cannot abandon your family like this. Blood is a binding legal contract. Natalie and I will make sure a federal judge makes you pay for what you owe us. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer absurdity of his threat. He was a man actively drowning in a federal forgery scandal, standing in a restaurant threatening to sue the primary victim of his crime for not bailing him out. Before I could even open my mouth to point out the massive legal holes in his delusional plan, Harrison stepped seamlessly between us. He did not raise his hands or adopt a defensive posture. He simply stood there, a towering wall of bespoke navy wool and absolute authority, completely blocking my father from taking another step toward me. Thomas instinctively took a step back, suddenly remembering that the man standing in front of him possessed enough legal and financial firepower to erase his existence with a single phone call. Sue her. Harrison repeated the words, rolling off his tongue with a dark, mocking amusement. You want to walk into a federal courthouse, stand before a judge under oath, and openly admit that you forged your own daughter's signature to fraudulently obtain a $2 million commercial loan. You want to legally force her to bail you out of a felony you committed to fund a degenerate gambler. Please, Thomas, file the lawsuit. My legal team would love the entertainment. Thomas swallowed hard, his face losing its angry color. The house is family property. She has a legal obligation to protect the estate. The house, Harrison said, his voice dropping into a deadly conversational tone, is no longer your concern, Thomas, and it certainly is not your property anymore. My mother scrambled up from the floor, leaning heavily against the back of her chair for support. What do you mean it is not our property? We just mortgaged it. We still own the deed. Harrison slowly shook his head, looking at my parents with the kind of pity one reserves for roadkill. You really have absolutely no idea how the high-tier financial world operates, do you? Did you honestly think a major national bank would hand over $2 million and just forget about it? When Dominic routed that money offshore to his illegal bookies, the bank's automated fraud algorithms flagged the transaction immediately. Coupled with the fact that you have not made a single mortgage payment in the last 6 months, because Dominic lost all the liquid capital, the bank did not just freeze your accounts. They accelerated the entire loan. Vanessa stopped crying for a brief second, staring at Harrison with wide, terrified eyes. Accelerated? What does that mean? It means they demanded the entire $2 million back immediately, Harrison explained calmly. And when your parents failed to produce the funds, the bank executed a rapid foreclosure. They seized the collateral. The Hamptons estate was officially repossessed by the bank 10 days ago. My father staggered backward as if he had been shot in the chest. He reached out blindly, grabbing the edge of the mahogany table to keep himself from collapsing to the floor. No, that is impossible. We never received an eviction notice. We never received any foreclosure documents in the mail. That is because Dominic intercepted the mail, Harrison stated casually, glancing over at the trembling man huddled against the wall. He has been routing all of your financial correspondence to his own private post office box for months to cover his tracks. You lost the house, Thomas. The bank took it back, wiped your names off the deed, and immediately put the estate up for a private commercial auction to recoup their stolen capital. Diane let out a horrible, guttural wail. The Hamptons' house was the crown jewel of her social standing. It was the only tangible proof of wealth she had left to parade around her country club friends. Now it was completely gone, vaporized by the very man she had worshipped. We have to buy it back, Diane cried out frantically, looking back and forth between Thomas and Vanessa. We can find investors. Vanessa, call your friends. Call those wealthy influencers you hang out with. We can raise the money and buy it back from the bank before anyone else claims it." Harrison adjusted his cuffs, his expression completely devoid of mercy. "You are a little late for that, Diane. The private foreclosure auction concluded yesterday afternoon. The bank has already sold the property." My parents froze. The final nail had just been violently hammered into their coffin. "Who bought it?" Thomas asked, his voice nothing more than a hollow, defeated whisper. Harrison looked directly into my father's eyes, delivering the ultimate payload with chilling precision. "My private equity firm bought it, paid in full, in cash." The absolute silence that followed Harrison's declaration felt as heavy as a lead blanket. My father stared at Harrison, his brain desperately trying to process the magnitude of the statement. "Paid in full, in cash." The Hamptons estate, the very symbol of the family's supposed elite status, now belonged entirely to the man standing next to me. Vanessa suddenly snapped out of her tearful stupor. The realization that her ultimate safety net was gone ignited a frantic, irrational fury inside her. She slammed her hands against the edge of the table and pushed herself up, glaring at Harrison with wild, bloodshot eyes. "You cannot do that!" Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing painfully in the confined space of the private dining room. "You cannot just swoop in and steal my childhood home. That house belongs to my family. It is where I grew up. My memories are in that house. My bedroom is exactly the way I left it. You cannot just take it away because you have a thick wallet. I will chain myself to the front porch before I let you or your bitter wife step foot inside my sanctuary." Harrison did not even flinch at her hysterical outburst. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket and withdrew a crisp, folded piece of thick legal paper. He held it between his index and middle finger for a moment, letting the room focus on it before he casually dropped it onto the table right next to the scattered bankruptcy documents. "I am not stealing anything," Vanessa Harrison replied, his voice a smooth, impenetrable surface of pure corporate indifference. "I made a legitimate, legally binding real estate transaction at a county-sanctioned auction. And that piece of paper you are staring at is the official court-ordered notice of eviction. As the new legal owner of the property, I exercised my right to clear the premises. In fact, while you were sitting here drinking vintage wine on a declined credit card, my private contractors were emptying the estate." My mother let out another agonizing gasp, clutching her chest. "You emptied the house," she whimpered, her eyes wide with terror. "All of our furniture, our artwork, everything was professionally packed and relocated to a climate-controlled storage unit in a highly industrial part of Queens." Harrison informed her coldly. "I have paid the rental fee for exactly 30 days. After that, whatever you do not claim will be auctioned off to cover the remaining storage costs. I suggest you find a very large moving truck quickly." Vanessa was practically hyperventilating. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face contorted with pure, venomous hatred. "You are sick, Natalie. You are completely twisted. You bought my childhood home just so you could sleep in my bedroom and pretend you finally have the life I always deserved. You are going to live in our house and gloat." I looked at my sister, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion mixed with absolute clarity. The sheer arrogance it took to assume I wanted anything of hers was staggering. I let out a short, cold laugh that completely stripped away the last remaining shreds of her ego. "Sleep in your bedroom," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "Vanessa. I would not let my worst enemy sleep in that house. The entire property is a crumbling, outdated monument to this family's toxic vanity. It is structurally compromised and completely lacking in any architectural value. I have absolutely no intention of ever living there." My father looked up from the eviction notice, his face a mask of complete bewilderment. "Then what are you going to do with it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why did you buy a multi-million-dollar estate if you are not going to use it?" "Oh, we are going to use it," Harrison interjected, checking his expensive silver watch with a look of mild boredom. "But we are not going to live in it. The house itself is entirely worthless to us. The true value is in the land and the commercial zoning permits that came with the foreclosure." Harrison looked directly at Vanessa, ensuring she absorbed every single syllable of his next sentence. Tomorrow morning at exactly 6 o'clock, a team of heavy demolition crews will be arriving at the front gates. The bulldozers are already parked on the adjacent street. They are going to level the entire estate to the ground. Every single wall, every single floorboard, and every single memory you claim to hold so dear will be crushed into dust before lunchtime. Vanessa let out a piercing scream covering her ears, as if she could physically block out the words. You cannot tear it down. You cannot destroy my home. It is already done, I said, taking a step forward to deliver the final blow. The land is being completely cleared. Once the debris is hauled away, construction begins immediately on a massive state-of-the-art biotech research facility. It will be a sprawling campus dedicated to advancing medical technology. I paused, making sure my parents were looking directly at me. And the best part, I added, my voice dripping with absolute undeniable triumph. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of that facility. The daughter you threw away is building an empire right on top of the ruins of your precious legacy. My parents were rendered entirely speechless. The sheer magnitude of my victory had finally broken the last remaining pillars of their arrogant foundation. Vanessa stared blankly at the tablecloth, her mouth opening and closing silently, completely unable to process the fact that I was actively erasing her entire childhood history to build a medical empire. The room was heavy with the suffocating realization that I had won. But just as the absolute finality of the situation began to settle over the table, a sudden harsh sound shattered the quiet. It was Dominic. He let out a dark, bitter laugh that sounded completely unhinged. We all turned to look at him. He pushed himself away from the mahogany credenza he had been cowering against for the last 20 minutes. The pathetic, trembling coward was suddenly gone, replaced by a man backed so far into a corner that he had absolutely nothing left to lose. He reached up and violently yanked his silk tie loose, unbuttoning the top of his collar. He rolled his shoulders back, staring at Harrison with a look of pure toxic desperation. You think you hold all the cards, do you not? Dominic spat, taking a slow, aggressive step toward my husband. You think because you are a billionaire chairman, you can just snap your fingers and crush my entire life? You think you can throw a fake dossier on the table, accuse me of federal crimes, and I am just going to roll over and let you send me to prison? Harrison did not move. He watched Dominic with the mild, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. I do not think Dominic. Harrison replied evenly. I know. Dominic shook his head, a malicious sneer twisting his features. No, you do not know anything about how the real world operates right now. He pointed a finger directly at Harrison's chest. You are a wealthy, privileged white billionaire who just fired a black man with a flawless corporate record. You fired me with zero notice, locked my bank accounts, and then showed up at a private family dinner to humiliate me. Do you have any idea how that is going to look on the front page of the Wall Street Journal tomorrow morning? My father looked up, completely baffled by Dominic's sudden pivot. What are you doing? Thomas hissed. Dominic ignored him, keeping his eyes entirely locked on Harrison. I know exactly how the corporate media works in this country. Dominic continued, his voice rising with manic confidence. The press absolutely loves a scandal. They love tearing down untouchable executives like you. All I have to do is make one phone call to a major news outlet. I will tell them that my termination had absolutely nothing to do with missing logistics funds. I will tell them it was a personal, racially motivated vendetta. Vanessa gasped, looking at her husband as if he had grown a second head. I will claim wrongful termination and severe racial discrimination, Dominic declared, pacing back and forth in front of the table. I will say that you discovered I was married to your wife's sister, and because of some ancient family grudge, you used your absolute power to frame me for embezzlement. I will tell the world that the forensic audit is completely fabricated. The media will eat it up. They will run with the headline before your public relations team even has a chance to draft a denial. He stopped pacing and leaned aggressively across the table toward Harrison. Do you know what happens to Apex Holdings when that story drops? The stock price will instantly plummet. Your shareholders will panic. The board of directors will demand an immediate independent investigation into your leadership. You will be tied up in public litigation for years. Activist groups will protest outside your corporate headquarters. Your entire legacy will be permanently stained by the accusation alone. The sheer audacity of the threat was staggering. Dominic was actively trying to weaponize his race and the current corporate climate to extort a billionaire. He was using the threat of a massive public relations nightmare as his final desperate shield. But I am a reasonable man, Dominic said, lowering his voice into a calculated extortionist tone. I can make this entire problem disappear. I will quietly sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I will walk away from Apex Holdings without making a single sound. I will even take the blame for the Hamptons mortgage and let your wife keep her little medical facility. And what is the price for this remarkable generosity? Harrison asked, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. $5 million, Dominic demanded without a single ounce of hesitation. You wire $5 million into a private offshore account of my choosing by midnight tonight, and you immediately withdraw the federal lawsuit. You give me the cash, and I disappear. If you refuse, I am calling my lawyer and the press the second I walk out of this restaurant. Dominic crossed his arms, a sickeningly triumphant smile returning to his face. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate loophole. He believed he had successfully checkmated a titan of industry. Harrison stared at Dominic for 5 long, silent seconds. He did not yell. He did not express outrage at the blatant blackmail attempt. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. He did not say a word. He just looked down at the glowing screen and tapped it once. A sharp, clear electronic chime echoed from the speaker of Harrison's phone, followed immediately by a burst of static. Then a voice filled the suffocating silence of the private dining room. It was loud, crisp, and undeniably clear. It was Dominic, but the tone of his voice was entirely different from the polished, sophisticated executive persona he had been broadcasting all evening. He sounded slick, arrogant, and dangerously reckless. Listen. I need this $2 million washed and moved to the Grand Cayman account by Friday. At the latest, Dominic's recorded voice demanded through the small speaker. The heat is going to come down soon, and I cannot have this capital sitting in a traceable holding company. A second voice crackled over the audio, thick and gravelly. $2 million is a heavy load to move on short notice, Dom. Where exactly did you get that kind of capital so fast? A booming laugh erupted from the phone. It was Dominic laughing with cruel, unfiltered amusement. From my pathetic in-laws, the recorded Dominic boasted. They are the easiest marks I have ever played. They are so desperate to look progressive and wealthy to their snobby country club friends, they practically handed me the deed to their Hamptons estate. I watched my father's face contort into a mask of pure agony. He had sacrificed his own daughter, committed a federal felony, and lost his entire life savings because he believed Dominic respected him. Hearing himself referred to as an easy mark, a pathetic tool used to stroke his own racial and social insecurities, broke something fundamental inside his mind. I just threw a few big financial buzzwords at the old man, the recorded. Dominic continued, his voice dripping with contempt. He ate it right up. He signed whatever I put in front of him. Stupid, gullible white folks. They want a successful black son-in-law to show off so badly they do not even check if the checks bounce. And my wife is even worse. She thinks she is running a global fashion empire, but she is completely bankrupt. I am just using her to bleed her parents dry. Vanessa let out a strangled, breathless sound, gripping her own hair. She stared at the man she had proudly flaunted for 9 years, realizing he had despised her the entire time. He had viewed her as nothing more than a convenient, oblivious host for his parasitic greed. Harrison casually reached down and tapped the screen again. The audio cut off instantly, plunging the room back into a traumatic silence. He slipped the phone back into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket keeping his eyes locked on the sweating, trembling mess that was Dominic. "So Dominic Harrison," said his voice a smooth, lethal purr. "You want to go to the press. You want to call the Wall Street Journal and loudly complain that your termination was a malicious act of racial discrimination. I highly encourage you to make that phone call right now, because I will personally ensure this audio file is attached to every single press release your lawyer attempts to send out. Let us see how the public reacts to your tragic story of corporate oppression when they hear you explicitly bragging about scamming your elderly in-laws out of their retirement funds." Dominic was shaking so violently his knees were physically knocking together. He backed away, pressing himself flat against the mahogany wall. "That is illegal," Dominic stammered, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "You cannot use that. That is an unauthorized wiretap. It is completely inadmissible in any court. You cannot just record my private phone calls without my consent. Any decent defense attorney will have that thrown out by the judge." Harrison smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. "You are absolutely right about the law," Dominic Harrison agreed seamlessly, taking a slow, predatory step forward. "Unauthorized wiretaps are highly illegal. But there is a massive flaw in your defensive strategy. This was not an unauthorized wiretap, and my corporate security team did not record this conversation." Dominic blinked his panic briefly, giving way to utter confusion. "Then who recorded it?" he whispered, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "You see," Dominic Harrison explained, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "When you started frantically looking for a sketchy offshore broker to wash the money you stole from my logistics accounts, you reached out to a man you thought was a professional money launderer operating out of Miami. You sent him encrypted messages on a secure app, and then you made that phone call 2 days ago to finalize the transfer." Harrison leaned in close, his shadow completely enveloping the terrified man. "That man on the other end of the line is not a money launderer. He is an undercover federal agent working directly for the FBI Financial Crimes Division, and he legally recorded every single word you said." The word federal echoed in the private dining room like a gunshot. Dominic stood completely paralyzed for 3 agonizing seconds. His brain misfired desperately, trying to compute the sheer impossibility of the situation. He had spent his entire life being the smartest guy in the room, the slickest talker, the ultimate master manipulator. And now the final trap had snapped shut around his ankles. There was no clever corporate jargon that could talk his way out of an FBI sting operation. There was no lie big enough to cover a legally recorded confession with an undercover federal agent. His eyes darted wildly around the room, resembling a cornered animal, realizing the predator was already inside the cage. He looked at Harrison, who remained a statue of pure, unbothered power. He looked at me, standing completely indifferent to his impending ruin. He did not even look at Vanessa, who was still clutching her head in a state of absolute catatonia. Then Dominic chose the only option a coward ever really has. He ran. With a sudden, violent burst of adrenaline, Dominic lunged away from the mahogany wall. He scrambled past the heavy dining table, his hip violently clipping the corner. A silver platter crashed to the floor, sending remaining pieces of crystal shattering across the thick carpet. Vanessa let out a startled shriek as her husband shoved past her chair with enough force to tip it backward. She scrambled to catch her balance, completely ignored by the man who had sworn to love and protect her. Dominic burst through the glass-paneled doors of our private alcove and sprinted straight into the main dining room of Le Bernardin. The scene was absolute chaos. Patrons in tailored suits and designer evening gowns gasped in shock as Dominic tore through the elegant space. He knocked over a tray of champagne flutes held by a terrified waiter, sending glass and expensive alcohol raining down onto the polished hardwood floor. He was hyperventilating, his expensive silk shirt soaked in sweat, his eyes fixed entirely on the stainless steel swinging doors of the restaurant kitchen. He knew if he could just make it through the kitchen and out the delivery alley, he might have a fraction of a chance to disappear into the New York City night. He was 10 feet away from the kitchen doors. Then 5 feet. He never made it to the handles. Two men who had spent the entire evening quietly sipping sparkling water at the marble bar near the back of the room moved with terrifying speed and precision. They did not look like police officers. They wore impeccably tailored dark suits that allowed them to blend perfectly into the wealthy crowd. But their movements were entirely tactical and completely unforgiving. The taller of the two men stepped directly into Dominic's path, planting his feet firmly against the floorboards. Dominic, running at full speed and completely blinded by panic, crashed squarely into the man's chest. It was like hitting a solid brick wall. The impact knocked the wind entirely out of Dominic's lungs, sending him staggering backward. Before Dominic could even attempt to regain his balance, the second man was already behind him. With practiced, effortless efficiency, the agent grabbed Dominic by the collar of his ruined designer jacket and twisted his arm violently behind his back. Dominic let out a pathetic, breathless yelp of pain as his shoulder was wrenched into an agonizing lock. The first agent stepped forward, grabbing Dominic by the back of the neck and slammed him face first into the decorative wooden paneling next to the kitchen doors. The heavy thud echoed through the suddenly silent restaurant. "Get off me!" Dominic screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he writhed uselessly against the wall. "You do not know who I am. I am an executive. Let me go right now." The agent holding Dominic's arm did not even blink. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming gold shield. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the agent announced, his voice carrying clearly across the breathless dining room. My parents and Vanessa had just stumbled out of the private alcove, stopping dead in their tracks as they witnessed the absolute destruction of their false idol. The agent pushed his forearm harder against the back of Dominic's neck, pinning him entirely to the wall, while the second agent reached for the metallic cuffs at his belt. "Dominic," the agent continued, his voice devoid of any emotion, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The cold, heavy click of steel handcuffs ratcheting around Dominic's wrists sounded louder than a bomb. "You are under arrest by the authority of the United States federal government," the agent stated, tightening the steel cuffs. "You are being charged with multiple counts of felony wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and grand larceny." The sound of the heavy steel cuffs locking into place seemed to finally break whatever spell had been keeping the entire restaurant frozen. A collective gasp, followed immediately by frantic whispers, erupted across the main dining room. Wealthy patrons, Wall Street executives, and Manhattan socialites craned their necks, completely abandoning their Michelin-starred meals to watch the spectacle unfolding near the kitchen doors. Dominic was no longer a high-powered executive holding court in a private alcove. He was a desperate criminal being pinned against the wood paneling like a common street thief. The federal agent holding his arm yanked him backward, forcing Dominic to stand upright. His custom-rented suit was hopelessly wrinkled and stained with panicked sweat. His expensive silk tie hung loosely around his collar, making him look completely unhinged. Dominic frantically scanned the crowd of onlookers until his wide, terrified eyes locked onto Vanessa. She was standing just outside the threshold of our private dining room, her hands covering her mouth, her ruined makeup making her look like a terrifying porcelain doll. "Vanessa," Dominic pleaded, his voice cracking loudly in the quiet restaurant. "Vanessa, you have to call my lawyer. Call the firm right now. Tell them it is an absolute emergency. Tell them I need immediate federal representation. And call your bank. Empty your corporate accounts and get the cash bail ready. I cannot stay in a federal holding cell tonight. You know I cannot survive in a place like that. Please, you are my wife. You have to help me." Vanessa did not move a single muscle to help him. She did not reach into her designer purse to pull out her phone. She just stared at the man she had proudly paraded around for the last 9 years. The man who had constantly validated her toxic superiority complex. She finally saw him for exactly what he was. He was a broke, lying parasite who had gambled away her parents' retirement, orchestrated federal mortgage fraud, and left her completely destitute. A look of pure, unadulterated revulsion washed over her face. She took a slow, deliberate step backward, shaking her head. She was actively and physically distancing herself from the catastrophic wreckage of her own marriage. When Dominic realized his wife was abandoning him, a fresh wave of absolute panic hit his chest. He twisted his neck, fighting against the firm grip of the federal agent, and looked directly at my father. Thomas Dominic yelled, his voice echoing loudly over the murmurs of the wealthy dining room. "Thomas, you have to bail me out. We are family. I made a terrible mistake, but I can fix it. I swear to you I can fix all of this. Just get me out of here and I will pay you back every single cent. I will work for the rest of my life to pay you back. Do not let them take me away like this." My father stared at the man writhing in federal custody. The sheer audacity of Dominic asking for bail money after stealing $2 million and single-handedly destroying the family estate was almost incomprehensible. Thomas felt the eyes of every single elite patron in the restaurant burning into his skin. He felt the absolute crushing shame of being publicly exposed as a gullible fool who had financed a degenerate criminal. Thomas did not scream. He did not curse at Dominic. He simply set his jaw, his face hardening into a mask of absolute disgust, and he turned his back. He completely turned around, facing the empty private alcove, refusing to even look at Dominic for one more second. My mother, Diane, immediately followed suit. She pulled her expensive shawl tightly around her shoulders and buried her face in her hands, turning away to hide from the massive public humiliation. They were entirely abandoning him to the federal justice system. "No," Dominic shrieked, struggling uselessly against the agents. "You cannot just leave me here. Thomas! Vanessa! Somebody help me! Let us go," the lead agent commanded, completely ignoring Dominic's hysterical screaming. The two agents grabbed him firmly by the arms and began to march him straight through the center of the main dining room. It was the ultimate perp walk. The man who had spent the entire evening bragging about his untouchable wealth and his imminent promotion to chief financial officer was now being forcibly dragged past the tables of actual billionaires and genuine corporate executives. The patrons of Le Bernardin did not hide their disdain. They stared openly, some even holding up their smartphones to record the pathetic display. Dominic tried to lower his head, trying desperately to hide his face from the flashing cameras and the judgmental glares, but the agent kept his head pushed up. He was forced to look at the elite society he had tried so desperately to infiltrate, watching as they looked back at him with nothing but pure contempt. I stood in the doorway of the private alcove with Harrison standing silently right behind me. We watched the federal agents push Dominic through the heavy glass front doors of the restaurant and out onto the busy Manhattan street. Red and blue emergency lights flashed brilliantly against the windows, illuminating the dark sidewalk. They shoved him roughly into the back of a waiting black federal vehicle. The heavy door slammed shut with a sound that signaled the absolute end of his fraudulent existence. His fake billionaire persona was completely and permanently destroyed in front of the most powerful people in New York. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles slowly faded into the dense Manhattan traffic, leaving behind a profound and absolute stillness in their wake. I turned away from the heavy glass front doors of the restaurant and walked slowly back into the private dining alcove. Harrison walked right beside me, his presence a constant grounding force in the center of the total wreckage. The elegant room looked like the site of a natural disaster. Smashed crystal water glasses covered the thick carpet, catching the light from the chandeliers above. The white linen tablecloth was stained with spilled vintage wine and completely cluttered with the federal bankruptcy documents that had destroyed my family. My father was still standing exactly where he had turned his back on Dominic, staring blankly at the mahogany wall. He looked like he had aged 20 years in the span of 30 minutes. His shoulders were slumped and his breathing was shallow. My mother remained collapsed in her chair, her face buried in her hands, quietly whimpering. They were entirely paralyzed by the realization that their financial future was eradicated. But it was Vanessa who finally broke the heavy silence. She turned away from the doorway, her eyes darting frantically around the ruined room. The absolute reality of her situation was finally crashing down on her with the force of a freight train. She had absolutely nothing left to her name. Her fake luxury brand was completely bankrupt. Her rented designer dress was due back to the warehouse on Monday. Her leased sports car was likely already being towed from the valet stand outside. And the husband she had stolen from me 9 years ago was currently sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle facing decades in federal prison. She was going to be publicly humiliated by every single socialite she had ever lied to. She was going to be investigated by angry creditors and left completely destitute. Vanessa locked her bloodshot eyes onto me. The arrogant, untouchable golden child persona completely evaporated from her features. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the floor right in the middle of the shattered crystal and spilled ice entirely uncaring that the sharp edges were scratching her bare legs. But she did not stay there. With a pathetic, agonizing sob, she scrambled forward on her hands and knees across the expensive carpet. Before I could even step back, Vanessa reached out and grabbed the hem of my dress with both of her trembling hands. She clung to the fabric as if she were a drowning woman holding on to the last floating piece of wreckage in the middle of a dark ocean. "Natalie, please, Vanessa," sobbed her voice, a raw, guttural plea that echoed off the paneled walls. "You have to help me. You are the only one who can help me now." I looked down at her. The woman who had spent her entire life making sure I felt small, ugly, and worthless was now physically groveling at my feet. The fake cubic zirconia diamond necklace swung wildly around her neck, a pathetic reminder of the cheap illusion she had chosen over her own sister. Her tears soaked into the fabric of my dress, leaving dark, heavy stains. "I have nothing, Natalie," Vanessa cried out, her chest heaving with sheer panic. "The creditors are going to come after me. When the news of Dominic's arrest breaks tomorrow morning, they are going to freeze my personal accounts. They are going to take my apartment. I am going to be completely homeless by the end of the week. I do not even have enough money to hire a defense attorney to legally untangle myself from his federal charges. I could go to prison as an accessory just because I am married to him. I need a lawyer. I need a place to stay." I did not try to pull my dress away from her tight grip immediately. I just stood there letting her feel the absolute weight of her own pathetic desperation. "You have billions," Vanessa begged, tilting her head back to look at me, her face completely ruined by running makeup and terror. "A few $100,000 is nothing to you in Harrison. It is pocket change. You could write a check right now and save my life. I will pay you back. I swear on my life I will pay you back. I will work for you. I will do whatever you want. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire family. Just please do not let me end up on the street." My parents slowly turned their heads to watch the pathetic display. They did not intervene. They did not tell Vanessa to stand up and keep her dignity. They were just as morally bankrupt as she was, silently hoping that my sister's ultimate humiliation would somehow unlock my wallet and save them all. I looked at her hands gripping my dress. I thought about the 9 years of intense therapy, the sleepless nights, and the crushing insecurity I had to conquer just to survive the betrayal she inflicted on me. I thought about the cruel smirk on her face when she slid that anniversary invitation across the table just an hour ago, mocking my supposed loneliness. I reached down and firmly grasped her wrists. With the exact same cold, calculated precision I had used on our mother, I peeled Vanessa's fingers off my dress one by one. She let out a sharp gasp, her hands falling uselessly to her sides, as I took a deliberate step backward, severing the physical connection completely. I looked down at her, making sure my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady so my parents could hear every single word. "I would love to help you, Vanessa," I said, maintaining a pleasantly devastating tone that mirrored her earlier arrogance. "But as you made very clear when I arrived tonight, this table is for family. Go find another one." Vanessa let out a hollow, agonizing gasp, curling into a tight ball on the floor amidst the shattered crystal. She buried her face in her knees, her shoulders shaking violently, as the reality of her total isolation finally broke her spirit. She had no husband, no money, and now no sister to serve as her safety net. I stepped around her trembling form, my heels carefully avoiding the spilled water and the scattered federal documents that had destroyed my family. I did not look back at her. I had spent 33 years looking back, hoping for a sliver of sisterly affection that never existed. I was completely done. I turned my attention to the doorway. The senior waiter who had previously dealt with Dominic and his declined credit card was standing nervously just outside the glass-paneled doors. He was clutching the black leather bill folder tightly against his chest, his eyes darting between the weeping woman on the floor and the two terrified parents sitting at the table. He had witnessed the FBI raid the screaming and the complete financial ruin of his highly demanding guests. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to approach the situation or who was going to pay for the extravagant dinner and the incredibly rare $15,000 bottle of vintage wine sitting unopened on the serving cart. I raised my hand and caught his eye. I offered him a polite, reassuring smile and gently gestured for him to come inside. He swallowed hard, adjusting his apron, and cautiously stepped into the disaster zone of our private dining alcove. He walked with stiff, measured steps, actively avoiding the debris on the carpet until he stopped right next to me. "I am so sorry for the massive disruption to your dining room tonight," I said, keeping my voice calm and completely professional. "I know this was incredibly chaotic for you and the rest of the restaurant staff. We are ready to settle the bill now." The waiter offered a tight, nervous nod, stealing a quick glance at my father. "The total for the evening, including the 1947 Cheval Blanc, the customized tasting menu, and the private room fee, comes to $18,420, miss." My father let out a pathetic groan, dropping his head heavily into his hands. He did not have $18,000. He did not even have $18 of liquid cash that was not tied up in the fraudulent mortgage scheme Dominic had just evaporated. My mother squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself for the humiliation of being arrested for defrauding a restaurant right after her son-in-law was hauled away by the federal government. I did not even blink at the astronomical number. I calmly reached into my designer clutch and pulled out a heavy matte black card forged from solid titanium. It was not a corporate card. It was an exclusive invitation, only account reserved for individuals with an exceptionally high net worth. I held it out to the waiter. "Please put the entire balance on this," I instructed smoothly. "And I would like you to add a $10,000 gratuity for yourself and the kitchen staff. You handled a highly volatile situation with absolute grace, and you deserve to be compensated for dealing with the sheer arrogance you were subjected to earlier this evening." The waiter stared at the heavy titanium card in his hand, his eyes widening in pure shock at the massive tip. "Are you absolutely certain, miss?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly with genuine gratitude. "I am completely certain," I replied, offering him a warm smile. "Please process it." He bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect that Dominic had desperately tried to buy, but failed to earn. The waiter quickly pulled a handheld terminal from his apron, inserted the heavy metal card, and tapped the screen. There was no hesitation from the machine. There was no embarrassing error code or security freeze. The transaction was approved instantly, printing out a crisp white receipt. My parents watched the transaction in agonizing silence. They watched their discarded scapegoat daughter casually drop nearly $30,000 on a Tuesday night without breaking a single sweat. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof of the massive empire I had built, while they were busy worshipping a broke, lying criminal. The waiter handed me the receipt and a silver pen. I signed my name with quick, fluid strokes and handed it back to him. "Thank you so much, miss," the waiter said, his posture completely relaxed now that the financial tension had evaporated. "Is there absolutely anything else I can do for you and your husband before you leave?" I paused, looking over at the lavish spread of uneaten world-class food cooling on the mahogany table. My eyes drifted to my parents, who were sitting in the ruins of their fraudulent lives. Actually, yes, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Could you please pack up all of the remaining food in your best takeaway containers? Do not throw a single bite away. The waiter looked slightly confused, but nodded quickly. Of course, miss. I will have the kitchen box everything up immediately. Should I bring the bags out to your car? No, I replied, my gaze locking onto my mother's terrified, tear-stained face. Do not bring them to my car. Give all the takeaway bags to the older couple sitting at the table. I let a cold, razor-sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth as I delivered my final instruction. They are going to need every single scrap of those leftovers. With the bank foreclosure and the impending federal investigations, it is going to be a very tough week for them. Let us make sure they do not starve while they are packing up their storage unit. The waiter nodded quickly, turning to gather the silver trays. I did not wait to watch him pack the leftovers. I simply turned my back on the private dining alcove. Harrison placed his hand firmly on the small of my back, a quiet and incredibly grounding gesture of absolute solidarity. We walked out of the room together, leaving the heavy mahogany doors wide open behind us. I did not say a single word of goodbye. There was absolutely nothing left to say. I had delivered my final verdict, and the execution was complete. Behind me, I could hear the pathetic sound of my mother sobbing loudly into her linen napkin and the sharp breathing of my sister, who was still curled up on the floor. They were a portrait of total devastation, completely drowning in the toxic mess they had spent a decade creating. As Harrison and I walked through the main dining room, the atmosphere was entirely different than when we had arrived. The wealthy patrons who had just witnessed Dominic being hauled away in federal handcuffs were now watching our departure. But they were not glaring at us with disgust. They watched us with a quiet, undeniable reverence. They recognized power when they saw it. They saw a billionaire chairman and his wife walking away from the wreckage, completely unbothered and entirely victorious. I kept my head held high, my posture perfect, feeling a profound sense of peace settling into my bones. We were halfway across the expansive dining room, just approaching the elegant front vestibule, when I heard the sudden frantic sound of heavy footsteps slapping against the hardwood floor. Natalie. Wait. Natalie, please wait. The voice was loud, desperate, and cracking with pure panic. It was my father. Thomas had finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The reality of his impending homelessness and potential federal prison sentence had completely overridden his massive ego. He was practically sprinting through the restaurant, pushing past a startled waiter and ignoring the annoyed stares of the elite diners. I did not stop walking. Harrison did not even break his stride. We continued moving toward the heavy glass front doors, where the imposing head doorman was already standing at attention. "Natalie, I am begging you," my father yelled, his voice echoing through the quiet lobby. He was completely out of breath, his face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. I was wrong. I see it now. I was completely wrong about everything. We reached the front doors. I paused for just a fraction of a second. I still did not turn around to look at him. I simply stood there, listening to the man who had spent my entire life telling me I was a disappointment. I backed the wrong child. Thomas gasped, stopping just a few feet behind us. The sheer ugliness of that statement hung heavily in the air. You are the successful one. You are the one who actually built something real. Vanessa is nothing. She is a fraud, and Dominic is a criminal. But you, Natalie, you are brilliant. You are everything I ever wanted a daughter to be. Please just turn around. Look at me. Give me one more chance to be your father. We can fix this. His apology was the most disgusting thing I had heard all night. He was not sorry for the years of emotional abuse. He was not sorry for standing by while my sister stole my fiancé. He was not even sorry for forging my signature on federal bank documents. He was only sorry because his golden child went bankrupt and his scapegoat became a millionaire. He realized his winning horse had just dropped dead on the track, and he was desperately trying to switch his bets. I felt Harrison shift slightly beside me, ready to intervene, but I gently squeezed his hand. I did not need him to protect me from Thomas anymore. My father possessed absolutely no power over my life. I did not turn around. I simply took a step forward as the doorman pulled the heavy glass door open. The cool Manhattan night air washed over me. It felt like breathing pure freedom. Thomas lunged forward, reaching out to grab my arm to force me to stay. "Natalie, do not walk out that door." Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of my blazer, the restaurant's head doorman stepped squarely into the gap. He was a massive, broad-shouldered man, and he physically blocked the entire doorway. He placed a firm hand squarely against my father's chest, stopping his frantic momentum instantly. "I am sorry, sir," the doorman stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "But you are causing a severe disturbance, and you need to step back right now." Thomas tried to push past him. "Get out of my way. That is my daughter." "She does not want to talk to you, sir," the doorman replied coldly, shoving my father backward into the lobby. "And you are not following her onto my sidewalk." I stepped out into the night, leaving my father trapped inside the glass walls of his own ruin. The heavy glass door swung shut behind me, completely cutting off the sound of my father's frantic pleading and the pathetic reality of his ruined life. The sudden, absolute silence of the restaurant lobby was instantly replaced by the familiar rhythmic hum of New York City. The cool night air washed over my face, carrying the faint scent of rain and city pavement. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the tense, knotted muscles in my shoulders finally begin to release. Right at the edge of the curb, under the glow of a street lamp, our black Bentley was already waiting, its engine idling smoothly. The driver stepped out, instantly opening the rear door with a respectful, silent nod. Harrison placed his hand gently on the small of my back, guiding me forward into the night. I slid into the plush leather seat, the rich scent of the interior enveloping me, and he climbed in right beside me. The heavy car door closed with a solid, comforting thud, sealing us inside our own quiet sanctuary, completely and permanently separated from the toxic wreckage we had just walked away from. The privacy partition separating us from the driver was already raised. The car smoothly pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the flowing traffic of Midtown Manhattan. The glowing streetlights passed over us in a steady, hypnotic rhythm, illuminating the quiet interior in brief flashes of gold and white. Harrison reached across the center console and took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. His grip was warm, steady, and incredibly grounding. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer any empty platitudes or try to analyze the absolute destruction of my family. He just sat beside me, offering his silent, unwavering support. I turned my head to look at him, taking in the sharp lines of his profile illuminated by the passing city lights. For a man who had just orchestrated the complete financial and legal dismantling of 3 desperate people, he looked remarkably peaceful. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly clear in the quiet luxury of the car. Harrison turned to me, a soft, genuine smile touching his eyes. "You never have to thank me for standing by your side, Natalie. That is exactly where I belong." I smiled back, a genuine expression of love that felt entirely different from the forced smiles I had worn for my family all my life. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest and turned my gaze toward the tinted window. I watched the towering skyscrapers of New York City blur past their lit windows, looking like thousands of tiny stars against the dark sky. My mind drifted back through the turbulent journey of the past 9 years. I thought about the terrified 24-year-old girl who had cried on her childhood bedroom floor, utterly convinced that her life was over because she had been discarded by the people who were supposed to protect her. I had spent so many years after that night driven by a desperate, agonizing need to prove them wrong. I built my venture capital firm on a foundation of pure, unadulterated spite. I wanted to amass enough wealth, enough power, and enough undeniable success to force them to look at me and finally apologize for how they treated me. I wanted them to realize their massive mistake and beg for my forgiveness. But as I sat in the back of the Bentley, holding the hand of a man who truly valued me, I realized that the burning desire for their apology had completely vanished. The sweetest part of tonight was not watching Dominic get hauled away in federal handcuffs. It was not exposing the pathetic rented illusion of Vanessa's bankrupt life. It was not even buying the Hamptons estate just to bulldoze it into the ground. The ultimate revenge was the profound, unshakable realization that I simply did not care about them anymore. Their opinions, their validation, and their toxic hierarchy held absolutely no power over me. My worth was never tied to their approval. It was tied to my own resilience, my own intelligence, and my own capacity to build a beautiful life out of the ashes they left behind. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was not the victim. I was entirely and unconditionally free. I shifted in my seat, leaning over to rest my head gently against Harrison's broad shoulder. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close as the car carried us toward our real home. The city lights continued to flash by, bright and full of endless possibilities. I closed my eyes, leaving the shadows of my past exactly where they belonged. Far behind me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace, let me know how you found your freedom in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and claiming your own worth. Remember, your value is never determined by those who fail to see it. Stay strong, and until next time. We often spend years, sometimes decades, trying to prove our worth to the very people who have repeatedly chosen to misunderstand and belittle us. In Natalie's story, we see a deeply painful but all too common pattern: the scapegoated child working tirelessly to earn a seat at a table that was never designed for her. For 9 long years, her relentless drive and ambition were rooted in spite a desperate, lingering need to show her cruel parents and deceitful sister that she was finally enough. When the truth came to light, when Dominic's fraudulent existence collapsed and the family's self-inflicted financial ruin was publicly exposed, it seemed like the perfect stage for the ultimate revenge. However, the most profound lesson we can take away from this story is not about the fleeting satisfaction of watching karma dismantle the lives of those who betrayed you. The real lesson is about the liberating power of absolute emotional detachment. Natalie's true triumph was not walking into that elite restaurant with a billionaire husband, nor was it buying her childhood home just to bulldoze it. Her greatest victory was the quiet, unshakable peace that settled in her heart when she realized her father's desperate last-minute apology meant absolutely nothing. True freedom is found the exact moment you stop waiting for toxic people to validate your existence. It is the profound understanding that your value is intrinsic, forged through your own resilience and character, not dictated by the conditional, transactional love of a dysfunctional family. You simply do not owe your light to those who repeatedly choose the dark. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to reclaim your own worth, please share your story of breaking free in the comments below.